The Louisville men's basketball team had a rough weekend after losing 99-77 on the road at Wake Forest on Saturday evening. We'll talk about that contest and more on this episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. As always, I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credential media member for Cardinal Sports Zone. I also do some PA announcing work for the University of Various Sports. I want to take this time to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. We'll start out this Monday edition of the show discussing how a big night for the Wake Forest offense helped the Demon Deacons pass the Louisville Cardinals 99-77. We'll then transition, take a step back, and focus on one of the big issues of the season, and that is not having a number one scoring option. And then finally, we'll get into a little bit more of a positive note and talk about why there is a lot to work with on this Louisville roster for the next men's basketball coach. We'll start out talking about the game from Saturday evening. The Wake Forest Demon Deacons handled the Louisville Cardinals very soundly, 99-77 in Winston-Salem, behind a huge offensive night from the floor. They were 58.2% from the field, 32 of 55 field goals. However, they were 13 of 27 from behind the arc, 48%, and also 22 of 27 from the free throw line. So overall, it was one of those games to where it started out rough. Like, Louisville was down probably 20-4 early on, and the Cardinals came back. They made it a respectable halftime deficit. It was 8 points. It was 44-36, and overall, I thought that, okay, they withstood a big surge from the Wake Forest offense. They cut it to 8. They got the momentum going into the second half. Let's see if they can do anything with it. And unfortunately, Wake Forest continued, their hot shooting night and, ultimately pushed the deficit out, and it was out of reach early on in that second half. Looking at the box score, Sidney Curry, what a night he had for the Cardinals off the bench, 28 points, 7 rebounds. He was the only Cardinal scorer in double figures outside of Noah Locke, who shot 50% from the field. He's still, Noah Locke has quietly been having a very solid past couple weeks. Wake Forest, on the other hand, all 5 starters in double figures. Justin Laravio led the way with 23 points. Walton with 22. Alondez Williams, 5 for 12 from the field, had 11 points, 5 assists. Probably maybe the front runner for ACC Player of the Year. Didn't necessarily have his greatest game. Williamson had 15, and I think it's Musius had 12. Hildreth also with 8 off the bench. It was just an instance to where I think that the team is trying the hardest that they can. In some aspects, I also think the effort in other areas isn't the greatest, and it seems like I wouldn't necessarily say that this team is checked out. I think that they're just trying to put the pieces together, and they just necessarily haven't been able to do so throughout the course of the season. We'll talk about one of the the main obstacles that this team is facing in the next segment. But overall, I thought that certain players played pretty decently. Like I said, Sidney Curry, man, what a hell of a game he had. What a good last half of the season that he's had as well. 28 points, looked very solid around the rim. No one could really stop him. He had a couple and ones. I loved the way he attacked the basket when he got the ball down on the block. One concern I had with Sidney Curry's game coming into the season was how polished was his footwork down on, in the low post. Was he going to be able to create, his own shot? And we see the strength. I mean, it's outstanding. I mean, he's doing a very, very good job of using his body in a smart way. I feel like with guys that are, extremely strong, one obstacle that you have to focus on is opposing players really selling, the call and selling the contact and forcing a charge call. He does a great job of, using his contact and using his strength in the right way and avoiding those situations and really kind of showing that footwork off in the paint. I think that he's doing a better job of, getting the ball, face up toward the basket and attacking it in the low block, getting the ball down, on the baseline and attacking. So, I mean, I'm thrilled with the way that he's playing. I also think that Sam Williamson played pretty solid, had some good minutes, only had, I think, 7 points, 3 for 4 from the field, but he had 5 rebounds. I liked what I saw from him offensively. Dre Davis also with 8 points. El Ellis and Jared West combined to shoot only 5 shots. No starter scored in double figures. Malik Williams played 3 minutes. Had 0 points. Jae'Lyn Withers played 6 minutes and had 2 points. It was all Sidney Curry. He played 28. Sam Williamson played 22. Noah Locke had 30. Mason Faulkner had 21 minutes. I like the fact that we got to see some minutes from Roosevelt Wheeler. Although only scoring 2 points, I thought that he had some good minutes. Overall, just a game to where I didn't necessarily think that Louisville was going to get absolutely blown out. I didn't think they were going to lose by 22 points. But, with the way that Wake Forest had been playing, despite losing 3 out of the last 4 coming into Saturday evening, I thought that the way Steve Forbes had this Demon Deacon team playing, that, Wake Forest definitely had the advantage that they maybe didn't necessarily have in that late game in December. So the Louisville defense, anytime you give up 99 points, it's not all of a, hot shooting night. It's a little bit of everything. And I thought that Wake Forest had some open looks. They got some, rebounding wise. They had some, second chance opportunities that really hurt the Cardinals. They actually didn't even out rebound. Louisville had a 3 rebound advantage in that category. But credit Demon Deacons, man. They hit some very tough shots from the perimeter. You're talking about a guy within the defender, and the defender right up on the ball handler and just pulling up from behind the arc and banging the shot. That happened multiple times, especially in that first half, to where, you just had to throw your hands up like, good shot. Congratulations, man. Like, sometimes you can't play any better defense than what you see. I think that Steve Forbes really utilized mismatches in the paint as well. And it didn't seem like Louisville really saw that, or they didn't really adjust that until the second half. But by that point, it's Wake Forest was able to continue the hot offensive night, and I think that's why I think that the Demon Deacons are one of the best teams in the ACC, despite not being up there in the standings at the moment. So I want to transition into talking about one of the obstacles that I mentioned just a little while ago. That is not having a true number one scorer, and I think that that's made things a little bit more challenging throughout the course of this season. We'll talk about why that is here in just a second after we talk about our friends at BetOnline and the title sponsor. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs, and it remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline is where the game starts. Also want to take this time to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, including YouTube, 5 days a week, your team every day. Also, before we get into the next segment, I want to mention that there is a new Locked On Louisville YouTube page. If you follow us on social media at LO_Louisville, you can check out that new link, which is posted in every single episode, tweet. You can also check out my personal Twitter at @defense_ in the graphic below. The page with 145 subscribers is the old one. The new one, I think, has 13. So, go subscribe to that one, like, share, rate, subscribe, etc. I definitely appreciate it. So, Without further ado, let's get right back into the content of the show, talking about the lack of a number one scoring option for Louisville. And one of my biggest concerns coming into the season, if you've been listening to the podcast since the season started, one of my main concerns with this team was, yes, it looked like the team got some upgrades in the offseason. But unlike last season, I worried because that it didn't look like there was a number one scoring option on the team. Now, my response to that, or my attempt to alleviate some of those concerns was, well, maybe they don't maybe you don't necessarily need a number one scoring option. Like not every team has a number one scoring option, and some of it are successful. I mean, you see, we were projecting Jae'Lyn Withers to have, take another step forward and possibly be an all ACC caliber player. You were looking at guys like Noah Locke to take a next step forward his game and possibly be, a 1B, 2A type scoring option. Dre Davis as well. Sam Williamson was a guy that I had some high hopes for. Malik Williams, you knew, or you thought you knew what you were getting from him. Ellis, I mean, I predicted that he was going to be a guy that averages in double-digit scoring figures. Right now, he is currently at 8.8. There's not a single player on this Louisville team that averages over 10 points per game. Now, look, I get it. It's a balanced attack that Louisville has, but it makes things more complicated because now you put that aside. You put the number one scoring option aside. Now you have to focus. Okay, that just adds more responsibility to the supporting cast to, make sure that you consistently put in good performances. And I think that that's been one of the main issues is not only is it a consistency issue, consistency is something that you strive for every single time you step out on the court, but not having a true number one scoring option makes that consistency issue, or I guess I should say it magnifies it, because if let's say if Carlik Jones would have opted to come back, and we'll say maybe Noah Locke also decided to transfer in, maybe Jared West doesn't. Let's say you add Carlik Jones to this roster and you take out like a Noah Locke or a Jared West. Carlik Jones wasn't a true number one scoring option, or even maybe a David Johnson, who I think could have been a number one true scoring option. If they have a good game, like a Carlik scoring 17 to 18 a game, or having a solid game, that takes away some of the need for your supporting cast to step up more than if you didn't have a Carlik Jones, to where you were being relied upon to handle the bulk of the scoring. So obviously you want your supporting cast to do good. I'm not saying that the supporting cast can take a night off because you have a number one scoring option. We saw last year that even when you do have that, you still can struggle if the supporting cast isn't stepping up. But I think that when you look at all of the close games that Louisville's had this year, and when they've kind of trailed and they've kind of battled back and forth, and they've gotten the game to where it's within striking distance multiple times throughout the season, and they aren't able to get over the hump. I think that the correlation is right there. And I'm not going to say that I've been ignoring that notion that, okay, one of the reasons why this offense is struggling is because they don't have a go-to. They don't have a go-to guy. I mean, I think that ultimately L. Ellis will get there. I think that L. Ellis is going to be a go-to guy. I think that Sidney Curry is going to be a go-to guy. But I think that, having to rely upon these guys, both of them, early on in the season, or not early on in the season, but like early on in their respective Louisville careers, and I just don't necessarily think that that's a huge recipe for success. I'm not saying that either of those guys cannot be scoring options, nor can other guys on the roster. But I think that, because I think that those guys are very talented and they're going to get there. But I think that, as they get acclimated to the speed of Power 5 ball, and as they, get comfortable with the rotation, I just think that, soon we'll see L. Ellis and Sidney Curry being, big time, scoring options for Louisville. But at the end of the day, there's been a couple issues, and obviously we could talk about off the court stuff all we want. We talk about the coaching aspect of things all we want. Like I get it, right? There's a lot of things, and there's no one thing that you can look to and be like, okay, this is the one reason why we're bad, or this is the main reason why we're bad. Because I think it's like this mesh that we're seeing of off the court stuff and, coaching issues coming with like chemistry issues and lacking a scoring option. It's kind of just combining. And that's why the Cardinals are 12-16 right now. So I think that, there's a lot to, be desired from in that category, because I think that, a lot of people came in saying, okay, Noah Locke's going to be that scoring option, that number one scoring option. And I think the reality that we're all kind of, gravitating toward now is the fact that, no disrespect to Noah, but Noah Locke has never been a number one scoring option in his career. In his time at Florida, I mean, we're talking about a guy that never averaged over 10.7 points per game. He's always been a very solid role player that shoots the ball well from behind the arc. That just necessarily hasn't been the case. Jared West is another one of those guys to where, he came into Louisville and not necessarily, he was known for his defense. Matt Cross, a guy that came into Louisville, known for being a spot-up shooter. And obviously he hasn't necessarily kind of lived up to that expectation. But I think that we went into the season thinking that players were going to step into those roles and step into being a number one scoring option. And it didn't necessarily work out. Noah Locke has been a role player, and I wonder if, I think that he's having a season on par with, how he's performed throughout his career. I'm not saying he's had a bad season. I'm not saying he's had a great season. I'm saying he's had, his sample size, he's giving you what he's given, Florida, throughout his career. He's, flirting with 10 points per game, shooting the ball over 34% from behind the arc. What you're getting from Noah Locke. But I think that, some guys are regressing this year, mixed with, just maybe not having that guy on the roster. That's where things, the struggles kind of start. So I think that that's why lacking a number one scoring option is one of the reasons why it's made things kind of tough for the Cardinals this season. I do want to, kind of, take this in a positive direction and kind of use this to kind of springboard us into the next topic. That is explaining why there is a lot of, this Louisville squad, it brings a lot of positives for the next head men's basketball coach. We'll talk about that here in just a second. After we talk about our friends at Built Bar, look, it's usually the time of the year that I pretty much gears resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I'm actually enjoying eating them. If you haven't tried the Puffs, they're the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy. And they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. They're a fan favorite with some incredible flavors, yummy cinnamony churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie, etc. They're going to be your new favorite. And spoiler alert, all Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. They're low calorie, high on protein. You can replace your candy bars with these. They're better. A typical candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories compared to a Built Bar, which contains about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Mint brownie, coconut almond, and new for this month, white chocolate cookies and cream. They're all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. If they think a flavor might be good, they'll make it. It will be delicious, and it will be good for you. So do yourself a favor. Go to Built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Once again, that's use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Transitioning into the final segment of the show with the men's basketball team, talking about why there's a lot of promise for the next head coach coming in terms of this current roster. Look, I will say this to start out with. There's no guarantee of who's going to be here next year. Some guys have college eligibility, but, Jeremy Wallman on the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast said that, Sam Williamson and Noah Locke are unlikely to be back next year. Obviously, that's, what he said. I'm not, saying that is, set in stone or anything like that. It very well may be, but I'm just saying, crediting the source in which it was said. Jared West does not have any college. I don't think he has any. I don't think Jared West has any eligibility left. But Malik Williams is gone. Shout out to Malik. Definitely appreciate him. But there's a lot of promise for the next head men's basketball coach on this roster. It starts with El Ellis and Sidney Curry. We're all, disclaimer, we assume that, if I talk about it, we're assuming that they're staying. If they're, obviously you can say that, okay, any of these guys can leave. Sure, they can. It's, you get basically a one-time transfer as well. So, or immediate transfer. So you have to focus on that. And we're operating under the assumption that they're going to be back unless we hear otherwise. I think that obviously it starts out with L. Ellis and Sidney Curry. Talked about, throughout the show that both these guys could end up being number one scoring options down the road. Sidney Curry is coming off of a 28.7 rebound outing against the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Right now, he's averaging 5.8 points per game and 3.6 rebounds. L. Ellis, on the other hand, 8.8 points per game. I think that next year they're both going to take a step forward in their respective developments. Obviously it seems like Kenny Payne remains the fan favorite, although there's been kind of a push from the fan base for Eric Musselman from Arkansas. Scott Drew from Baylor, which probably is not going to happen. I'll say that I don't think that Scott Drew would leave Baylor, so on and so forth. So ultimately, we're kind of in a situation to where I think that it really just depends on the coach and which coach comes in, and that will kind of dictate which, some coaches are better in terms of developing big men, some are better in guard play, some are better in, getting, incoming freshmen to play to a certain level. Ultimately, there's just a lot on this roster that, has to bring some positivity for next year because there is some talent on this roster. I think that, whoever wants to come back is going to be welcomed back with open arms. We start with Sidney Curry, L. Ellis. Also, Roosevelt Wheeler is another guy, a freshman that hasn't necessarily played a ton, but you could see some potential in his game. Mike James, the freshman that tore his Achilles earlier before the season, there were some high hopes for him. You talk about the freshman class coming in: Kamari Lands, Frederick King, Tay Davis. All three of those guys have potential to be very, very solid throughout their career. You also could talk about, guys like Dre Davis. Moving on down the line, I think Mason Faulkner is also gone. You have Jae'Lyn Withers if he decides to come back. There's a lot of talent on this roster. Like, obviously, a new coach will want to bring in some players. You have the transfer portal. You have incoming recruits and possibly, reclassifications and stuff like that. I think that you have to assume that whoever comes into this situation is going to have Louisville in the contention to make the big dance next season, especially if it's a guy like Kenny Payne or Eric Musselman or, knock on wood, Scott Drew. I just don't necessarily buy the fact that this team has no talent like some people in the national media want to claim. This team obviously has the talent, but as I mentioned multiple times, it's a perfect storm of distractions and turmoil within the chemistry department and the coaching or not the firing, but the head coach being gone. Excuse me. So you have guys on this team next year. You look for L. Ellis and Sidney Curry to be kind of maybe the go-to guys for next year. Matt Cross, if he decides to come back, the shooting's there. It just seems like he's in his head a little bit. Dre Davis has been very solid. If you get Jae'Lyn Withers back, you assume, at to get him back on track. At least the confidence has kind of been there throughout the back half of the season. Hopefully that can continue. You have other guys throughout that, hopefully, Roosevelt Wheeler, Mike James, some of the younger guys that you look to develop as well. So overall, this is a roster that when you look at it, there's talent throughout, and you have to assume that, this next coach is going to welcome back whichever players that truly want to be back and then bring in some players for next season as well. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this basketball team makes the tournament next season. So we will continue to monitor that whenever we hear about a new coach, whenever that may be, the new hiring, I should say. Before we get out of here today, I want to give a couple quick shout outs. First to the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast. The most recent episode dropped on Sunday evening. You can check that out at cardinalsportszone.com. I want to say thank you again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. The bonus episode should be out here in just a little while with the women's basketball team, talking about the Sunday game against Notre Dame, and then previewing the upcoming ACC women's conference tournament. Now, do yourself a favor, make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker brings the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and wherever you get your podcast. But that's going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. There's going to be no episode tomorrow, unfortunately. I apologize for that inconvenience, but we will be back with an episode for Wednesday, for Wallman Wednesday, with Cardinal Sports Zone co-founder Jeremy Wallman. Likely will be in the virtual set with me. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. Everyone have a great start to your week, and we will see you right back here in a couple of days. Go Cardinals.